On this day, the 16th of December, 1850, the first of the 4 ships carrying the Canterbury Pilgrims arrived in New Zealand. The first 4 ships were carrying up to almost 800 immigrants or settlers. They'd come from England because the association, the Canterbury Association, sent them out there, and it was meant to be a settlement of Anglicans in the new colony of New Zealand. New Zealand had only been British officially for 10 years at this point. 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi was signed between agents of the Crown and Maori tribes up in the very north of New Zealand. They then went around New Zealand, getting as many of the tribal leaders to sign the agreement, which many did, although some didn't, and it has proved to be a ongoing legal wrangle in New Zealand over land rights. However, at this point, New Zealand was officially a British colony, after briefly being a dependency of New South Wales. So, the Canterbury Association, they wanted to settle English Anglicans in a new settlement that they wanted to call Christchurch, and they wanted to call the area Canterbury. Obviously Canterbury after the city, where the Archbishop Canterbury is the Archbishop of, although he doesn't live there, he lives in London, Lambeth Palace. But also they're going to call the city Christchurch, obviously. There's a Christchurch in England itself, and it's a very nice Anglican Christian name, the Church of Christ. So, in 1848, they formed this association with a plan to settle and set up a colony. Originally, they were going to settle a part of the North Island of New Zealand, Wairarapa, near Wellington. However, when they went there to survey the place, they were told that there was better land around the Banks Peninsula on the South Island. So they went down there and started surveying the area around what is now Christchurch. And they found that it was a very good place to settle. Canterbury, in the Canterbury Plain, is a very flat, fertile area, very good for agriculture. It's watered from the Southern Alps by a number of rivers. It has, the sea on one side, so you have ports such as Lyttleton, and it's surrounded by mountains, so it's quite protected on the western parts of Canterbury. And it looks stunning as well, so who wouldn't want to set up a colony in a place like that? So in 1849, they started preparations. They sent people out to Port Lyttleton, and they started building barracks for the original colonists. They didn't want to do what happened in America, where they just dumped people in the middle of modern-day Massachusetts and everyone kind of starved. Or Jamestown. That was another disaster. They wanted to have a settlement that would prosper. The company bought up quite a bit of land for pennies, so pennies an acre, so a good deal, and they were going to sell it to the settlers for £3 an acre. So it's a decent profit, and they were going to use parts of the profit to establish public buildings, housing, utilities, churches, schools, all that sort of thing, all the good stuff. Although the company didn't do all that well, it was wound up in 1855. So 5 years after they started settling Canterbury, they wound it up because they weren't making much of money, or they were probably losing money at this point. which was always the way with these land companies and colonial companies. They never seemed to make very much money, which is odd. Surely land is the thing where you get most money from. However, 1849, they start settling the area with the original fellas who came out there to set up the barracks and to plan the city. They had some help from architects and men from New South Wales and Australia, and they came along, putting up the buildings and setting out the street grid plan and all that. So, back in England, they got a number of ships, 4, and these ships were going to be carrying the first settlers out to New Zealand. So, the ships, the Randolph, the Cressy, the Sir George Seymour, and Charlotte Jane carried about 790 passengers, although apparently they don't know exactly how many because they didn't count children, and also a lot of the passenger manifests don't match up. So it could have been more, it could have been 800, more than 800, 900 even, if you probably would have had quite a few children on board. And they set out in late 1850. It took about 90 days, so 3 months, to get from England to New Zealand. And from what I can see, they had quite an easy time of getting there. There wasn't any incidents except for one ship which lost its mast, or they call it sprung her foremast. So she had to put up around the Cape of Good Hope and get them fixed. But she wasn't that late. So, 1850 they arrived, and the Charlotte Jane was the very first ship, and on board the ship there was about 150 passengers. I think it was 157 to be exact. So after this, they were the first people to arrive. After this, the other 3 ships arrived, and then the Cressy came along in the new year. Altogether, about 800 original settlers. Within a few years, there was 3,000 minimum people living there, so that 1853. There's about 3,000 minimum, although could have been as high as 5,000. So within 3 years, this empty plot of land in a perfect place had gone from nothing to a town of 3,000 to 5,000. Christchurch nowadays is, I think, the 3rd largest city in New Zealand. I could be wrong, but I think it's the 3rd, with about 300,000 or 400,000 people. And it all came from the Canterbury Association, their plans, and those first 800 settlers who set out as the Canterbury Pilgrims to establish a new city of saints in the South Island of New Zealand. So, if you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, subscribe, and comment.